Welcome. And of course, we will start with our bracha and dedicate the study, please God, to performing the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we can blame Kathleen for today's lesson because she said she would like to do a little bit more of this Maimonides. So Kathleen, thank you, by the way. I'm teasing you. All right. So Maimonides was giving us some background on the nature of Jewish prayer and made the point that that essentially, as far as a biblical commandment is concerned, commandment of the Torah, a deoraita, taking a moment every single day and turning towards our Creator and focusing our thoughts in that direction in terms of praise, appreciation, and then pouring out our needs, and then concluding again with a sense of appreciation is what is the mitzvah, as opposed to what many of us are familiar with, which is the statutory prayer that we find in the prayer book, essentially the Amidah. But he's giving us this development. He's giving us a little bit of a lesson in the development of Jewish prayer and the idea of this connection, and also very important to underscore that this is called service of the heart. In other words, we are commanded in the Torah to serve God, and through a couple of verses, interpreting those verses together, we conclude that we are talking about prayer, and this prayer that is in our hearts towards the divine. So this is where we left off, and I'm going to continue here. Kevan shegalu Yisrael bimei Nebuchadnezzar harasha. I love the way Maimonides editorializes a little bit while he's telling us, right? It says, since Israel were sent into exile during the days of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, Nitarvu bifaras v'Yavan, they became assimilated into Persia and Greece, Usha'ar u'ha'omot, and the other nations. V'noldu lahem banim, and children were born to them, ba'artzot hagoyim, in the lands of these nations. V'otan habanim, and those children, nitbalbalu sfatam, their language became confused, right? They didn't speak Hebrew anymore, right? So here we go. V'haita sfat kol echad ve'echad, and the language of every individual, me'urevet milshonot harbe, was a jumble, right? A combination, right? Mix-up of many tongues, many languages. Ve'kevan, by the way, that is in fact English, right? Ve'kevan shehaya midaber, and when he would speak, when a person would speak, and no yachol ledaber kol tzorcho, he would be unable to speak all his needs b'lashon achat, with one language, ella b'shibush, but in a mix-up, a confusion of languages, a polyglot, right? Shene'emar, as it states. So he actually quotes, and this is a quote from Nehemiah 13:24, right? So there's actually a statement in the Bible, in the book of Nehemiah, which is a post-exilic work, and it says, Uvnehem chatzi midaber ashdudit, and as to their children, half of them spoke ashdudit. It continues, etc. Okay, I'm trying to think of where the rest of that quote is. I have to look it up to give you the rest of the quote. I don't recall it. Let me see quickly if I can find it for you. I don't know if I can.
I just would add that actually polyglot, I think, means someone who can speak several languages.
Okay.
Whereas this sounds like a person who cannot speak even one language properly because their sentences they jump from language to language in
Yes.
given sentence because they don't know all the words they need in any one language.
Okay, when my recollection, and it's been a while since I read, came across the word polyglot, that it was used in connection with a language. But I'm not here to argue with you at all.
I mean, the point is, it's a polyglot to me sounds like a wonderful thing to be. You can speak French and Spanish and English and German, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But he's talking about a situation where people are actually kind of have a language disability. And I've seen this in Israel. If you grow up in an with English speaking parents, let's say, but you also know Hebrew from school, a lot of kids cannot get through a full sentence or have difficulty getting through a full sentence in one language or the other.
Yes.
So they jumble up the languages.
Right. And of course, Yiddish is also a mixture of languages, by the way. And of course, Aramaic that we have is in some ways also a combination of Aramean and, of Aramaic or Syriac and Hebrew. And I suspect Ladino is also a similar combination. I'd have to look it up, and it could have both. It could have both connotations or both denotations. I'm not sure.
So I looked it up.
Yes.
In addition to a person knowing or able to use several languages, knowing or using several languages, it can pertain also, it says, to cities and books that have been had their text translated. And it talks about like New Orleans being a polyglot city and about bilingual or polyglot dictionaries, things like that.
So it still sounds something that I wasn't defining it as. So I will stand. This is at least the first time I'm going to be stand corrected today. All right. Oh well. Okay. So
I mean, if you have enough people doing it all together in the same place, you can, after a few generations, produce a new language, which is like Yiddish or Ladino. That's great.
Yeah.
It's called a Creole.
As I said, English is rich for the fact that it has both German, Latin, and French roots within it, So at any rate, going on here. Let me find it. Okay. Yeah, I was looking up the rest of that quote and it's trying to find it. Yes. Einam makirim ledaber Yehudit uvelashon am va'am, etc. It says they weren't able to recognize Hebrew, the language of the Judeans, something like that. So anyway, it's in that Nehemiah quote. Let me keep going here. Finding it here. Right. Ukilshon am va'am. And as the language of every nation, umipneze, on account of this, keshaya achad mehem mitpalel, right? When an individual amongst them would in fact attempt to pray, tikatzer leshono, his expression, his articulation was insufficient. Nishol chafetzav, to be able to seek out, to request his needs, to be able to articulate his needs, or lahagid shevach hakadosh baruch hu, or to express the praise of the Holy One, blessed be He, belashon hakodesh, in Hebrew. Ad sheyarvu ama ima lashonot acherot, without mixing up with that expression other languages. V'kevan shera'a Ezra uveitino, and this is something that I think many of us are not really aware of. It isn't emphasized all that much, but here's Ezra with his court in this first exile, and it says, and since Ezra and his court saw kach, they saw this situation, amdu v'tiknu lahem shmona esrei brachot. They got up, in other words, they determined they took action, and they established for them 18 benedictions al haseder, in order. Shalosh Rishonot, the first three, Shevach LaHashem, praise to God. V'shalosh Acharonot, Hodaya, and the last three, acknowledgement. The Emtzaiyot, Yesh Bahem, and as far as the middle, the intervening benedictions, Yesh Bahem She'elat Kol Hadvarim, in them was the request, right? They were petition for all the things, Shehen Kamo Avot, which would be considered primary. In other words, each one was a different primary. It wasn't necessarily a specific request, but it was a broad but primary kind of request. L'chol chafetzei ish ve'ish, for each and every person, letzorchei hatzibur uletzorchei hatzibur, and for the needs of the community, hulan, all of those. So all those intervening benedictions are supposed to address all the needs that we have, both as individuals and communities. And I thought this was really beautiful and interesting, and how Maimonides tries to describe the development of our statutory worship. Kedei sheyu aruchot befi hakol, so that they would be arranged in the mouth of everyone. So everyone, in other words, would be fluent in these words. Vayilmadu otan, and they would learn them, right, or teach them. V'tiyet, I think it's they would learn them. V'tiyet filat elu ha'ilgim, and so that the prayer of these inarticulate people, tfilah shlema, it would be a full prayer, a complete prayer, ketfilat ba'alei halashon hatzacha, just like those who were capable of pure language, who were able to speak pure Hebrew. Umipnei inyan zeh, and on account of this situation, tiknu kol habrachot v'hatfilot mesudarot, they set up all the blessings and the prayers, mesudarot lefi kol Yisrael, arranged in the mouths of all Israel. Kedei sheyehe inyan kol bracha aruch befi, so that the I would say subject, if you want to help me here, or the substance of every blessing, aruch, set up, befi eleg, I'm going to guess, is, so it should be in the mouth of people who could not articulate their prayers properly. So we see this development happening as a result of the challenge to Jewish worship, and also, but understanding that this comes as part of a commandment. What I think is helpful about this is it helps us look at this whole issue in a different kind of way. And the idea of this whole notion of being able to articulate the prayers in this particular way, I think is connected to a notion and a sense of the privilege and the respect that here we are standing before the creator of the universe, right? I mean, we are, and just trying to understand, and this is so, at least my sense is, counterintuitive to this modern way in which we have vaunted the individual into a level of importance, and sort of ignore the fact that we are a very small, regardless significant, right, part of a world that is far, far greater than we are. And to have that sense that there's a need to be able to say it, and in a proper way. And of course, we see this mirrored in, for example, my understanding is that, so for example, if you go to visit the Queen of England, right, who is a human monarch, but there's all these particular little details involved in how far away you stand, what you're allowed to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. There's this really profound sense of how you show respect. And that's essentially what I see, developing here and the sensitivity here. So I'll go a little bit more because this, as you can see, he has plenty more to say about this, but this isn't our subject matter. I just felt it was something that you might find interesting and worthwhile. So I'll try and do one more. V'chein tiknu, and they also set up sheyehei minyan hatfilot, that the number of prayers, right, that the actual count of prayers, keminyan hakorbanot, that they should count, that we're talking about tefillot here, is we're talking about the services, right, or the Shmona Esreis, those silent devotions where we stand, those amidas is what we're talking about, should correspond to the number of offerings, right, the sacrifices. Shtei tefillot b'chol yom, so there should be 2 statutory prayers every day, 2 amidas every day, keneged shnei tamidim, to correspond to the 2 daily offerings that's mentioned, right? V'chol yom sheyesh korban musaf, and on a day in which there was a musaf offering, this is mentioned in Parshat Pinchas. These offerings are mentioned, right? There's an additional statutory offering. Tiknu bo tefillah shlishit. They established a 3rd tefillah, a 3rd amidah, keneged korban musaf, to correspond to the musaf prayer. The musaf sacrifice. Utfilah shehi keneged tamid shel boker, and with regards to the amida that corresponded to the perpetual offering of the morning, he hanikret tfilat hashachar, that is referred to as the tfilah of the morning, or of dawn, perhaps. Utfilah, or sunrise, or something like that. But the morning prayer. Utfilah shekeneged tamid shel bein ha'arbayim, and the amida that corresponded to the tamid of the afternoon or the evening. He hanikret tfilat mincha. So, and that would be called the mincha. So the word mincha refers to setting. In other words, sunset. And so the time of the mincha actually is from about 12:30, if we're talking about astronomical noon. So we're talking about half hour after that, because at that point, one can see that the sun is starting into its declination. So that's the time for the afternoon offering, and therefore also the time for mincha. Utfilah shekeneged hamusafim, and with regards to the at amida that was said corresponding to the musaf, the additional offerings, he nikret tfilat hamusafim. So that is called the prayer of the musafim. So again, we see that there really is a powerful structure behind the prayer book and its development and the Amida, and this is in fact the essence of the prayer, and also the fact that its structure as well. In other words, we're not only talking about content, we're also talking about form, and that both having the form and the content have significance is part of what goes into part of what makes effective prayer. That it isn't simply us pouring out our needs, but that it's also this service of the heart that is mentioned at the very beginning. So again, as you could see, I could go on, but I think I'm going to stop here. And if I'd like to pause just in case there are any comments or questions, and we can head back into the text of the Torah. So any thoughts, any comments, any reactions before we go on?
I find this really important.
I agree.
To see this. Why are there 19 benedictions in the Shmona Esrei?
I know that's sort of right, because 19, of course, isn't Shemona Esrei means 18, and then 19.
Because
right.
there used to be 18 and then we added.
There's scholarly disagreement about this, but essentially this is mentioned in earlier sources, and that is, I believe, that the prayer that says basically La Malshinim Lo Tihi Tikva happened when there was a lot of heresy going on. And so the sages introduced a 19th benediction, asking God to prevent the heresy from taking over. So that's
Heresy, or what doesn't Malshinim mean like
I know.
informers?
Okay, so here's the thing. I think there's a version that I think it's referred to as the Tfilat Haminim, right? I believe. So, and there are versions, I think, that don't say Malshinim, but rather Minim. And a min means a heretic. So,
Okay. But
yeah.
Malshinim is like
An
informer.
informer, correct. Because and this is what happened. By the way, it's what caused the destruction of the Second Temple, essentially, was this. And this would go on, that there would be such rancor in the community that sometimes a group would go to the authorities and inform on other Jews. It was just very sad situation. Let me see what I can do to get back into our text here. There we go. So this all came out of Torah Tamima, that comment on the part that we found in the Torah Tamima. And I just thought I would take a byway and see if you would enjoy working on that. So let me now get at, excuse me, sorry. Okay. Just trying to find our place right now. Yes. Here we go. Back into a share. So we actually were starting a new chapter. Here we are. So remember, we had just read that Moses was told that he was to appoint Joshua to carry and lead the Israelites over across the Jordan and into the land of Canaan. So this is lovely. So we get back into Moses's speech here. Va'ata Yisrael, and now, O Israel, Shma el hachukim. Pay attention, listen to the statutes, the El HaMishpatim, and to the ordinances, Asher Anochi melamed etchem, which I am teaching you la'asot, to perform. Lema'an tichyu, so that you live, right? You survive, right? Uvatem urishtem, and you will come and inherit et haaretz, the land, asher Hashem Elokei avotechem, which the Lord, the God of your ancestors, noten lachem, gives to you. Excuse me, one moment. So sorry. Okay. One moment. Here we go. All right. Just making sure I am not skipping material. No, we have one more verse to go here. Lo tosifu al hadavar, do not add to the matter, or to the words asher anochi, to the matter asher, which I, anochi, that which I, metzaveh, command, etchem, you, v'lo tigra'u mimenu, nor take away from it. Lishmor et mitzvot, to guard the commandments, Adonai Elohechem, of the Lord your God, asher anochi metzaveh etchem, which I am commanding you. So don't add, don't subtract. What does that mean? So Rashi explains what he's talking about when he says lo tosifu, do not add, right? He says, and this is based on the Sifrei, right? Kagon chamesh parshiot patfilin. So, for example, adding 4 chapters or 4 different sections of Torah into the Tefillin. The Tefillin actually have 4 different paragraphs, Shema, right, that you're familiar with, V'haya im Shamoa, which you're also familiar with, Kadesh, which is in Exodus, okay, sanctify, V'haya yaviach ki yaviacha, and it shall be when he brings you. Those are the 4 paragraphs that are in the Tefillin. And when it says that, he says, don't add a 5th paragraph. It's not talking about the development in the way the rabbis have developed the mitzvot, both through inference and through protecting the Torah. It's talking about the specific mitzvot, and here we go, chameshet minin balulav, or doing 5 species in the lulav, right? There are 4 species in the lulav, right? The palm branch, the hadas, the myrtle, and the willow, and the etrog. Don't put 5. V'chamesh tzitzit, and don't put in 5 fringes. V'chein lo tigru, and likewise, don't put in less. That when you're asked to do these things, do them. Don't add, don't take away. Just do it the way you're asked to do it. Okay.
What about adding an orange on the Seder plate?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, right? I don't think it has I don't think it has the same significance, okay? Because these are symbols, whereas I would tend to see that less of an issue than putting in 5 tzitzis in the talis, okay? That's a really good question, and not an easy question to answer if one wants to look at it, carefully from both sides and in the light of what we just read here.
But the Seder's a rabbinic construct that has been, evolved over time.
Correct.
It's not. It wasn't Misinai.
No, it wasn't
No.
Misinai, and I think that would be an argument to say, that. And look, you could consider it a hidur mitzvah. We certainly have the idea of hidur
Absolutely.
mitzvah, and that's acceptable. All right.
Yeah, but what comes next is what I have a problem with.
Go
Because
on.
we can't
What's here?
truncate and we can't take things away.
Yeah.
It's like, it's because we keep adding, and it gets to be more and more and more, and never kind of pull things out that are, it's time to, it's probably dated and it needs to be revised or changed or something.
Okay, so
So there's little editing. There's little to do. There is no editing process in this at all.
okay. So
Coming up. Yeah.
okay. The truth of the matter is, though, that there has been development, and as I said, with regards to the oral Torah, oral law, that it is essentially an issue of circumstances alter cases, and that there's this balance. But at the same time, I think just how you go about editing is what I think is so important. And I've tried to make this basically the root of my philosophical approach to Judaism, which is, I believe, phenomenological. I think that's how it would be described, which means to try to understand it on its own terms before I start heading out into changing stuff. And not what bothers me is when people make changes and make assumptions and don't really try to understand it from its own point of view and then make the modifications in a sort of sympathetic kind of way. And it depends what. I mean, we know, we're told, what is the essence? If we actually have within rabbinic Judaism, what if you don't have time to say the entire Amidah? Well, there's a prayer. There are actually various formulations mentioned in the Mishnah, depending on circumstances, that allow you to abbreviate and shorten if you need to.
Right.
So,
But we don't know them. And there's a shorter version of Birkat if you're,
yes.
have to move and things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
So again, this is why Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. This is why the study of Torah is equal to it all. Because the more you study, the more you understand the flexibility that exists there. And so they very often say that when you look at the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, right, this sort of this Shlomo Ganzfried's version of the Shulchan Aruch, which is this abbreviated Shulchan Aruch, it is way stricter than the Shulchan Aruch itself, because because understanding how to be flexible is basically advanced studies. There's even a statement that says that there was a certain rabbi during Talmudic times who they had to be very careful. They could not use him necessarily as a halachic authority because he knew so much. He knew where the exceptions were, et cetera, and for people who did not have his kind of background, they would jump to conclusions that were false conclusions. I'm going to stop this share right now. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel that we have to have some flexibility, but being flexible on the basis of knowledge and deep understanding is different than making changes on the basis of ignorance.
Otherwise, we'd never leave services on Shabbat.
Well, yeah, I guess. But
Pretty
then on the other
much.
hand, you could have the attitude of if you love worship and you don't feel it's a burden and you don't feel it's nothing more than an obligation that you have to dispense with, you don't mind it. You don't
As
mind
long as
going
there's
home.
food.
Of course, absolutely. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
All right, but
Well, and on the shortest Shabbat of the year, I always say, why are we going home? You know, it's like, why bother? You should stay and read. You should have a special thing, because it's like you go home, take a nap, come right back. I mean, you may as well just nap that show. It's like,
well, there are, by the way, some groups who do feel the Shabbat should be spent in the synagogue the whole day.
ooh,
There are some who do feel
yeah,
that.
it's difficult when you have kids
Then
or
you
if
miss
you're
your nap.
older.
You got to have a
Well, as
shot.
long as there's a place to snooze, I guess that'd be all right.
Yeah. No, I just want to say, I think that was a very interesting Rashi, because when you see that pasuk, probably a lot of people would immediately say, oh, those Jews say, they ignore this pasuk. They've been adding all these laws and that are not in the Torah, the Rabbanim, look what they did.
Right.
And Rashi's saying, no. It just means four minim in the lulav, not 5.
Correct.
Right.
That's what it means. He doesn't refer to that controversy. He just explains what it means from a very different direction.
Yeah. And I don't know why it took me such a long time, but my sense is that if I were to explain the work of the rabbis and all the time they spent on it, it is an application of you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And that when you look at it's the essence of rabbinic work, it is the playing out of that commandment, because they really are trying to put it into practice. It is not a glib statement. So anyway, I will stop the recording here and